Let's start with the giveaway. If you listened to last week's podcast, then you know that Nicole so graciously offered to give away her book, Worth, to one of you and one for you to be able to gift to a friend. Thank you to every one of you that shared the podcast. And the winner is Dana Gruel. Congratulations, Dana. Message us your address to get your book in the mail for you and your friend. I cannot wait for you to be blessed. I also wanted to give a great big thank you to every single one of you that have entrusted me to help coach you in starting something this year. You guys have kept me so busy the first few months of the year, and for that, I am so grateful. I do know there's more of you that have dreams and ideas that you want to fulfill and reach this year. You've reached out and messaged and let us know. So if you have not yet, make sure to head over to unashamedlyu.com and schedule your first session for completely free. I cannot wait to help you start living out your dreams and fulfilling that calling that you are feeling. Let's make this the year that you live in faith over fear. Hello and welcome to the Unashamedly You podcast, a space to enlighten, encourage, and empower you to go out and unashamedly be who God is calling you to be. I am your host, Jamie Herndon. I pray you hear less of me and more of Him as you listen to today's episode. Let's grow together. The guest I am chatting with today is a friend that I met through social media. I've always been amazed at how well she is put together. And obviously, she is an amazing mom. Her kids are so cute. She always has them looking absolutely adorable. And then something really cool happened, you guys. My sister moved to Houston and she started attending the same church that she does. So it was really neat getting to meet one another in person. And I know that most of you on here know what I mean. So it's like whenever we were growing up and you had those pen pals you write letters to, you only see photos of. Social media feels like the pen pals 2.0. So seeing one another in person is really fun. She has been very open and kind of using social media, I guess, as a little bit of a blog because she'll talk about her life, childhood, motherhood, business, all the things. And I know there's a lot of things that we can glean from her. So I'm just thankful that she's taken time out of her busy schedule to be on here with us today. Amy, welcome to the Unashamedly You podcast. Take a moment and introduce yourself to our listeners.
My name is Amy Wyant. My husband and I, we live in Humble, Texas. We have two kids, 6 and 3, Ella and Colton, and we attend Porter Apostolic, Brother McCoy's church. And this is where Jamie has asked me to come and kind of share my testimony and bits and pieces of my life along the way. So I'm so excited to be here.
We're so excited that you're on here with us. I think what I've learned the most through people coming on this podcast and when they share their testimony online is that not everyone was raised how they turn out. Thank God. He makes up the difference in all of our lives. But can you share some of your childhood story with us and maybe start at the beginning of how you were raised?
So I was not raised in church. My dad got divorced when we were very young, about 5 years old, me, my brother, and my sister. I have a twin sister and a brother who is 11 months younger. So it's like triplets, basically. And later on down the road, there was another brother who was 5 years younger. But my dad remarried when we were very young, and we lived in a divorced home and split weekends with my parents. But that is kind of where the story really begins, and somewhat tragedy. But we were switching weekends with both parents, and my mom was just not in a good place. Whenever we would go over there, there was several times of different forms of abuse, whether that was alcohol or drugs or verbal abuse, just all of the genres of abuse my brother, my sister, and I had to endure. So that is kind of where it starts. And up until we were about 10 years old is when things kind of unfolded with all of that. Whenever we would go to my mother's house, she would always threaten us that, we should never tell our dad or else it'd be worse the next time we would go. And we did not. We actually never told my dad any of it until one of the visits with my mother one weekend. The abuse was so bad that me, my brother, and my sister actually ran away to a gas station and used the payphone at the time. Kids won't know what that is, but we used a payphone at the time. The clerk at the gas station let us use some change and we called my dad. And from what I remember, he didn't really ask any questions. They kind of exchanged words and my dad said, no more going to her house. But other than that, we never told my dad anything. My sister and I, we would journal everything that would happen to us as a kid, and that will play a role a little bit further in my story. But just the different things that she would do to us were very traumatic. Even now, having to overcome that, and I'll talk more about that in a minute, but just several things that I had to overcome in my teen years because of it. But after all of that, we were taken away and she still tried to contact us. She would show up at the bus stop, or there was one year we were walking home from school because it wasn't far of a walk, and her and her boyfriend would come and take pictures of us, and just very traumatic as a young child. So eventually that stopped. And my dad, when he remarried the second wife, when we were 5, there was actually a situation there, and my dad was actually incarcerated. Nothing towards us. My dad was always the very best parent to us. So he was incarcerated for 5 years. And at that time, CPS had taken us away, and we really had no family other than my grandparents and my aunt and uncle that we had no contact with, which is always funny. I feel like that's always how it works. The family member that's estranged. And my grandparents could not, take us on. They wanted to. They were there the night that my dad was put in jail for the first time. And my aunt and uncle kind of stepped in and said they would take care of us. And for 2 years, my dad had a trial. They had to rejure it twice. And during that time, we were 11 years old when this was all happening. And at the age of 12, my aunt and uncle adopted us. Me, my brother, my sister, and my younger brother actually stayed with my mother, who was 5 years younger than us. So unfortunately, he had to endure that situation longer than we did. But me, my brother, and my sister went with my aunt and uncle. We were adopted at 12. But it did not end there. CPS made sure to make our life difficult. They pretty much did not believe anything we were saying about, my dad. And even though the sentencing had nothing to do with us, and they were trying to ask us if we would like to go back with my mother. They asked my mother 3 times, even though from that point we had not spoken to my mother in several years. And she thankfully said no, like they are in a good place. Like she's just kind of a nomad. She would move from place to place, and, drugs kind of destroyed her life. But thankfully, CPS, they concluded it. Obviously, my dad was found guilty of the charges that he was facing, and my aunt and uncle got to adopt us at 12 years old, and my brother was 11. And that's kind of how we got in church. They attended a Pentecostal church in Atascocita, Texas, and that is where we spent 12 years of our life, and where we all received the gift of the Holy Ghost, and where basically it all started. But through that time, it was very difficult because both parents were taken away from us. And my mom, that was her on her part willingly to do that. But my dad, the only good parent that we had, was just ripped from us. And during that time while he was in prison, he missed the most important years of our life, our first boyfriend, first car, driving, all that stuff that, hurts as a child, because it takes a special person to love you when you're adopted as your own. And thankfully we had my aunt and uncle, but it was still very different. for us. So during that time, during our high school years, my younger brother actually passed away in a freak accident outside with his friends. So his name was Colton, which my son is named after him. And anyway, so it was a freak accident and he did not survive. So at the time I was 17 years old. So we had already experienced so much trauma from a child from basically 5 years old till that point in our life. And he was only 12 years old. My brother, Colton, was only 12 years old in my mother's care. And unfortunately, her choices had caused it. And that was unfortunate and was very hard as a high school student trying to wrap my mind around that. And I started to think that, my mother has lost all four of her children, three by choice, drugs and alcohol and abuse, and other one for neglect, not paying attention to what he was doing. And my dad was sitting in prison, suffering for something he did not do. But that happened at 17. I reconnected the relationship with my mother because I did feel like she needed somebody, but I still distanced myself. And during that time, I will never forget the youth camp that I went to. Thank God for youth camp. Your life can really change there. There was a message on forgiveness, and that's so hard to do when you have physical scars and memories embedded in your mind, because it is traumatizing. And I do believe that God has a defense mechanism, you could say, in our brains that helps us to not remember. And I remember praying that as a child, God, help me forget these horrible memories of, just the alcohol abuse and the drug abuse, and, forcing a 8-year-old to, open their mouth to do something is just horrific. And I think it developed a greater love for me as a mother, and, just that protective mama bear that, she gave me. Like, that sounds so weird and odd that my mother taught me how to love, even though I was never loved. I feel like she really did. And I forgave her. And it did take a lot. It took a lot for me to forgive her, but also distance myself. I don't hate her for what she did. And I've told her that, even though she doesn't recall some of the memories and everything. But that journal came into play because we were able to give it to my dad for him to read everything. And my dad, I've never really seen him cry. He's always been a very strong man. I've only seen him cry twice in my whole life, but he definitely broke down, and he had no idea that these things happened as a child to us, all three of us. And I felt like it was hard for my dad because I felt like he was stuck in time from when we were 11 years old. Even now, thankfully, we have a good relationship with my dad now that he's out of prison. But that time was very difficult because, like I said, it's hard whenever there's only one parent that's a good parent, and then you go from nothing and trying to open up. And, with my aunt and uncle was also very hard, but I also experienced very extreme depression through high school, and, tried to find different forms of things to fill that void of longing, just to be loved. And in high school, for me and my sister, it was really bad. And I know for my brother too, because my dad was my brother's best friend, and he already struggled with, anger issues and things like that. And so that was hard to watch, him spiral. But for me, it was depression. And there was one time in particular, which I've shared in my testimony, that I actually fibbed to my aunt that I could not go to school because I was too sick. And usually you had to be dying to miss school. And I told her I can't get out of bed. Like, my stomach hurts so bad and stuff like that. But upstairs, I knew where the gun was kept. So I literally crawled to get the gun. And thankfully, I didn't even check, but I grabbed the gun and crawled back to my bathroom and locked myself in the bathroom, cried at just begging God to take all the pain away. And just as a child, 17 years old, I feel still a child, but just so much pain, that I was experiencing so much rejection. And I eventually had enough in me to pull the trigger, and it was just clicking. And I remember being so angry, asking God, why? I just wanted to leave. I just felt like that was the only way out, is from the suffering, is just to be gone. And that, I let the enemy tell me that. Even in my adult years, he still tried, to get me with depression. That is always something that I've struggled with, is depression. But that was something that I had to overcome, and just tune out the enemy anytime that something difficult was happening. That was something that he, was always telling me. And I know not everyone struggles with the mind. And I was just telling my husband this, it's so hard to listen to somebody else's struggle, and you can feel what they're feeling, but sometimes you're like, how can you struggle with that whenever you have a beautiful home, you have beautiful children, you have, a healthy marriage, you have a job. People don't think you've gone through all these things until they hear your story, and they're like, how are you not crazy? I'm like, I know, a little bit, but I'm a little bit crazy sometimes, but it's all God. He really has brought me so far. There are days where I'm even amazed, like just different triggers. I'm like, that doesn't even bother me. And somebody said, that you're healed when you can talk about it and you're not angry. And I've felt that way for years now. If I've talked to my mother, and I've had situations even going out in public, because like I said, my mom is a nomad. I feel like she knows everybody and anybody. And we were at a car dealership, and a car sales lady walks up and she's like, can I take your picture? I was like, no. And she's like, for your mom, she lives with me. I'm like, no. And so it, just different things, but it didn't like make me upset. I'm like, I feel for her and I pray for her. And it actually happened sometime last year. A friend that I used to go to church with, she messaged me and said that, is this your mom? And she sent a picture, and I said, yes, that's my mom. And she's like, she was at my friend's church this morning and she got the Holy Ghost, which I'm thinking, my first thought was, somebody so evil does not deserve such a beautiful gift. And then the Lord instantly spoke to me and was like, but she's a soul too. And, sin is sin. All sin is equal. Everyone makes mistakes. But she's a soul too. Because I always thought, and I've talked to my sister about it, like, she's a soul too, but I don't want to be the one to reach her, and that sounded so bad. And the Lord started to work on me. And, when that happened, I was like, okay, Lord, she's a soul too. I can still distance myself and have healthy boundaries, but letting her know that as well, if that connection was ever made again. But I was very thankful, because I want to see her saved. I do want to see her up there in heaven, together. But I do feel like taking that time and processing everything, even if it took a decade, to do, it's still baby steps. Baby steps are still steps. And as long as you're doing it with God by your side and asking him to really help you, like with things that are buried, that's me. I like to bury things. I'm like a squirrel. I just bury. And it's hard for me to open up and take down those walls until it's like I explode. And I'm like, okay, but where did this stem from? And I'm like, oh, it's that little thing that's buried deep, deep down inside. Or my husband will say something. I'm like, yeah, that was probably it. That was probably what triggered it. And, I've learned different things to help with that. But that is the longest version short of, our childhood and how we were raised, and, a little bit about how I got here today.
You have me in tears. I don't know if I can talk. So, a lot of things that you said were obviously So good. And I know that you are all in tears as well. And I know that you can know why we brought her on today to share this because that is very traumatic. Like I said, there's so many times that we have all these things that have went on in our lives, but God, like how do you survive? And it's by his mercy and his grace, and he covers us and he covers everything that happens to us, even whenever it's not from us. The scars, the pain, the hurt that others have caused, he covers that too. And aren't we so thankful for that? So you talked about that you were 17 and you're living with your aunt and uncle. And then you talked about that your dad had got released. When did he get released? And then maybe tell us about how you met your husband as well.
So I met my husband at the church that we were going to, that my aunt and uncle pretty much raised us in from the time we were 11 years old. We met whenever I was 18. So I was just out of high school. And that's kind of how that happened. But I was pretty mean to him. I didn't talk to him. I was actually talking and dating somebody else at the time. And he was such a gentleman. He's like, that's okay. We can, I'll still be your friend. I'll still be here. Total gentleman, but like I'm still here type of thing. So notice me. Anyway, so that all happened. And I actually broke up with the guy and he asked if I wanted to go to IHOP. And we went to IHOP, but I was reluctant at first. I was like, no, I don't want you to be a rebound. Like, that's so harsh. And so he's like, no, that's okay. I want to be your friend. So we were sitting in IHOP and I'm devastated because the person I was with, is cheating. And I start crying while I'm eating. And he comes around and sits in the booth and gives me a hug. And he says, your hair smells good. I was like, okay, well, you're such a great friend. But I was telling my best friend this at the time, and she's like, you're going to marry him. And I was like, no, no. But every morning he would text me, like, good morning. I hope you have a good day. I mean, it was months. It was months because I did want to respect that, my time to heal and everything. But every morning, and I would never respond. And he would ask my friend, like, is she ever going to respond to me? Like, I'm just going to give up. And she's like, no, don't give up. And so the Lord always speaks to me in dreams, and I'm always in a field or it's in the clouds. It's so weird to try and describe it, but it's always writing in the clouds of what he's trying to tell me. And I was in a field in my dream, and it was like neon letters in the clouds, and his name was written. And so I called my friend, told her, and she's like, that means you're going to marry him. I was like, no, there's no way. Like, he was not anything I had ever, thought about, dating. Like, we were just friends. And the Lord reminded me because when I was 12, my aunt took us to a ladies' conference, and I will never forget it. But she said it didn't matter how young you were or old to write a list of things you wanted in your future spouse. And I still have it. And it was funny because every time I would date somebody, I would pull out that list and they would always miss one thing on it. And I pulled out that list after my friend had said that, and he marked everything off the list. And I was still like, no, there's no way, but I'll, connect that friendship or whatever. And it wasn't any time at all. It was like 3 months, and we had started dating, and then he asked me to marry him. But it was during that time, right before we got married, that my dad was released from prison. So, there's all those emotions of I hated going to visit my dad. I just hated seeing him like that. So I didn't really have a relationship with him from 12 years old till nearly 19 years old before I was going to get married. And so that's how that came about. And I made my dad and my uncle reluctantly walk me down because he didn't want to. He could not, he's like, he's my brother. Like, but you raised me. So my dad and my uncle, they both gave me away at my wedding. So that's kind of how that storyline plays out with meeting my husband and my father getting out.
It's so sweet. And that reminds me of me and my husband, or my husband and I's relationship as well. I wasn't always really nice, but he was always like, I'm like, whoever marries him is getting like Mr. Perfect. He's like the perfect guy.
Yes.
And I don't know why I was so dumb. Oh, but thankfully we got smart and
I know.
we married good. And that's really special that your dad was out in time to walk you down the aisle. I know that he was probably so thankful to be able to do that as well. Another thing that you have been open about online is you have talked about having your miscarriages and maybe speak to a mom that is longing for a baby or waiting on her rainbow miracle baby.
So this one, it makes me emotional sometimes to think about it because we do have two miracles by the grace of God. I was told that I would never be able to have kids naturally after our first one that we had, which our first one was also a miracle. We had one miscarriage before I got pregnant with our first, and he was a miracle baby. A lot of trauma through that, very, very hard pregnancy, but we had him. And then when we knew we wanted to grow our family, we started trying again. And I had two miscarriages after that. And the third miscarriage, well, it was a medical miscarriage. And whenever I went to the appointment, got the ultrasound, they saw the baby was in the uterus where it was supposed to be, and they said that there was no heartbeat or anything like that, and that it looks like it could be possibly an ectopic pregnancy. And I said, okay, well, what are the next steps? And they said that I need to look into possibly getting the tube removed or taking mild form of chemo medication to basically like kill anything that's in the tube already. And so I, called Pastor and Sister McCoy, and I was just crying. And the first thing I was like, I don't want to lose my hair. Like, I prayed over my hair. My hair was right here, and I would anoint it every night. Like, I just wanted long, beautiful hair. But that was the first thing I selfishly thought about, of course, and the baby. But I was like, I don't want to do it. Like, I didn't. And so we went up to the church and we got prayed for. And the next day we had to go back for, um, deeper, better machines like scans and to see where the baby was. And so I did, in fact, lose, that baby was no longer in the tube or the uterus. So they, said, it was ectopic, and I would naturally discard the baby and just be looking for the signs for that. Well, it wasn't a few weeks later that I was like, you know what, I'm going to go see a different doctor. I had still had no signs of, the baby not being in the uterus or the tube, no signs of anything. So, which was also discouraging. So I went and scheduled an appointment with a new doctor. And I told her everything that happened. Had only been a few weeks. Can you tell me like is where the baby could possibly be? And so the ultrasound tech, they're not supposed to say anything. So she was doing the ultrasound, and she's like, when did you say you lost the baby? And I was like, well, I haven't. I was like, but the scans that I have, I showed her the pictures. There's no baby anymore. Here was the baby, this day. Now it's moved somewhere. And she's like, well, do you believe in miracles? I was like, yeah, and she's like, well, there's a baby in your uterus. There's no way you could have gotten pregnant that fast. And I was, sobbing, and I was like, that was a whole God thing. God moved that baby. And so that's our Ellabella. That was our second miracle baby. But after that, she was 2 when we started trying again. I always knew I wanted more kids, but in total, I have had 7 pregnancies, so numerous miscarriages. And as bad as I want to say that, we got our third miracle baby, we never have. And we're just so at peace with what we have. And I felt like those 2 are perfect. And, God's teaching me how to be content and giving me that peace that only comes from him. But I've learned a lot of things, in that heartbreak, in the excitement of, this baby's going to stick, number 7, 7 is God's number. That was our last pregnancy. And just knowing, it was going to be a boy, or the one before that was a girl, like being that far enough along to know what it was, and that attachment really hurt. And then so many, babies booming right now, also hurt, and wanting to feel that excitement for friends, but also sadness. But that joy that God serenaded me with one night during service, and he restores the joy. Maybe not how I wanted to, but he has in so many other ways, in different things that I I needed. And that's how I felt, how I was able to overcome, that sadness of losing those babies, but also the joy that I know for a fact that I will see them again someday, and just to keep trying my hardest to get there every day and live like I should be. And God, he'll speak to me through different things, and you can always visualize. There's these beautiful poems, the babies in Jesus' arms, or they're holding you, and sometimes I literally feel like I feel a hug. There are so many times that I'm praying, and I literally, it's almost startling, but I feel that hug, like a little hand or something. I don't know how to explain it, but it only comes from him. He gives it, and I'm so thankful for that part of our story through the hurt. So if you are going through it, I encourage you to find, wise counsel. Let somebody speak into your life that maybe has gone through the same situations. Connect with the church body. We need each other. We need to be unified with one another, because there's going to be a time when you're going to be going through it, and you're going to need somebody to pick you up. So not being afraid to step out and say that I need help, I'm suffering, even if it's just one-on-one. My pastor's wife was that for me. And my friend Audrey, sometimes she kicks me in my rear, like, you've got to go talk to her, because I don't want to. It's so hard, because I don't want to cry whenever I feel like that's all I'm going to be able to do is just cry. But really, praying and getting into God's word, because there's nothing like God's word. His love that is shown through that, and through God's people, and praying that there would be people that he sends to you through that difficult time.
I love that you said leaning on one another, and finding someone to talk to. I think that that's kind of, we've talked about this on other podcasts before, but I think that's one of our biggest struggles, is sharing our struggles and letting others know, because you don't want to feel like you're a burden to them.
Mm-hmm.
You don't, like you said, whenever all you're going to be able to do is cry, and you don't want to feel that. But at the same time, like, God tells us to bear one another's burdens.
Yeah.
And we want, like, you would never turn someone away that come to you and wanted help, or, counsel with things like that. And so it's the same whenever you go to other people, but we don't think of it that way.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do. But I know that some of the things that you have spoke on has helped someone today. And I know that that is your goal as well with sharing that. So thank you so much. I know it's not easy to
Yeah.
share those
And I
stories.
wanted to add one thing too, not being afraid to step out, even when you're hurting and somebody else is going through the same thing or wanting the same thing that you're wanting. Don't be bitter about it. Be with them and rejoice with them in their blessing, or pray with them until they receive their blessing. Because I know that was hard for me. A lady in our church struggled with infertility for 12 years, and I had just lost that baby. And God spoke to me and told me that I needed to go find her, and I needed to grab her by the hand and take her up front. And I did. And she has a beautiful baby girl after 12 years. And God will honor it. He always does. He always honors it, even if it's not a blessing for us, it's a blessing for somebody else. A sacrifice, God always honors a sacrifice. Sorry.
For both. I'm a wreck. He definitely does. And what a beautiful story. And I know that that had to mean so much to her too, that you would have faith for her when you were going through such a storm. But I do believe with all of my heart that whenever we know, sometimes, it's like you can pray for someone, but if you've never been through it, you don't know really how to touch the throne of God for them
No.
in that situation. But it's like when you've been in that situation, you know how to pray and you know how to touch God in there because you know the desperation, you know the feelings, and you can pray with those feelings behind it. So yes, getting with someone and praying, and what a big person for you. I know you didn't tell that story to pat yourself on the back,
No, it was all God.
but still, what a big person to be able to put your needs aside and to go and pray with someone else, and then for them to receive that miracle. I know that that made you feel so good as well. And on this subject, talking about helping one another, something that you have recently been posting about on social media is you've been talking about being able to start again. And, even if things don't go the way that you expect them to go, or if, you start something and you don't continue with it, not being afraid to start something new. And I love that. I love the conversations that you have been having on that topic. And so I want to talk about that today. I know that you talked about starting a business last year that you guys, I think you had sold. And so can you share maybe some of the highs and the lows with that? I know a lot of times we think that we're the only ones going through something, especially in entrepreneurship too. Like it can be really lonely, which is why the Unashamedly You community is here to prove that we all have to overcome things in life. We're all going through something. I mean, she has shared so many things going through childhood and then, going through the miscarriage thing and then business stuff. Like we all have burdens to bear, but whenever we tell how we overcome them, that's a testimony. And it's a testimony to prove that God's goodness and that He's going to
Yeah.
carry us through. So can you talk a little bit about some of the highs and lows with owning a business and starting again?
So yes, we did have a business last year and we sold it. And that in itself was a miracle. We knew it would sell, but the highs and lows in between of starting business, the highs are, yay, I've got my business, it's a brick and mortar and, all the things that come with that. But the lows of what the business can do and the tolls that it can take on your family. And that's kind of what was starting to happen with us. For a good while, we felt like our business was a way to reach our community. I mean, we were in the heart of where we live, right now. And we did that. We wrote, scriptures on our cups and, all the things. And we had people that would come in and ask for prayer. Our customers were praying together. It was just, you could feel, and, customers were saying, there's something different about this place. And we knew that. We prayed over that and everything. We do felt like it was a God thing that we got it. And we also felt like it was a God thing that we were able to sell. But what comes with it, like I said, the tolls that it takes on a family and a marriage. And that's kind of what it was doing to us. And, some business genres you can say are just, meant for single people. Like there's just some genre you're like, yeah, this would be good for a single person with no children, and that's kind of how we felt like that genre of business that we were in, was like it was not meant for a family oriented type of thing long term. And so it, like I said, started to take a toll, and there are just different things. Our family is our priority, and that's ultimately what made us decide to sell. That it didn't matter how much money we were making, if we lose this very important thing right here, then what do we gain from that? That money's not going to buy you a new family. Money's not going to buy you happiness. And so we sold that business, and it wasn't even, I didn't even sell it. And my pastor was already asking if I wanted to teach. And I was like, teach like small children? And he was like, yes, and I was like, no. No. And so, he had asked, just think about it and everything. And I was like, this is going to be so hard because I would be teaching my child, like my child would be in my class and I need a break. Like it was just all these things overwhelming. And it was 1 week before school started, and our business sold just like that. And I started school the next week, being the kindergarten teacher here at our private Christian school. And so that's how that came about with that, but not being afraid to start again, even in my quiet season, letting God do what He needs to do during that time. I mean, it's almost been a whole year of, waiting and without asking. Don't That was me. I was like, okay, God, I have to be busy. Like I have to be doing something. And me, it was just like, okay, you need to take 5 seconds, maybe a year, and then it'll, just keep praying about it. And so that was the waiting, but not waiting and asking, God, I need this. I want this. It was just waiting, just getting deeper in God's word, getting deeper in my relationship with him and letting him speak through that quiet season of my life. And then we started the 52-day fast. We were praying about it, and my cousin who lives in Arkansas that goes to your church, she was talking about it, and I was like, yeah, I've heard about it. And then it wasn't just a few days later, you had shared Bishop's podcast, and me and my husband were both crying in the car. I'm like, we're doing it. And I wrote a list of everything, all the people, and a business wasn't even on there. I've always had, I've always had the entrepreneur spirit, you could say. I've just always been a go-getter, a dreamer of just different ways of thinking to make me happy, doing things that I enjoy. And it was very discouraging. If I didn't turn my phone off, I would show you, but I have an email written to you because I was in faith writing it like, Dear Jamie, on this 52-day fast, this happened. And I'm, in a week, I'm going to check back in because it's going to happen, But unfortunately, it did not happen. Nothing on that list. Nothing on that list happened. And that's okay, because God still honors sacrifice. And even though we did not see it in that 52 days, and everyone on that list, every single person on that list was hit. 2 of them recently passed from cancer. There was people that got divorced. There was people that their marriages were falling apart. People that have backslid. Just everyone on that list during that 52 days. And the enemy started talking to me and telling me that I haven't seen anything yet. And that was in January. And now it's April. And Pastor wanted us to fast 3 days for a person that had just passed Monday. And so we did. We fasted 3 days as a church for him to be healed. And we fully believed it. We fasted 3 days, and he passed on Monday. And then he asked us on Sunday, this was before the passing. So Sunday he had asked us to fast for 2 weeks. And the enemy started talking to me, well, you did a 52-day fast. Nothing happened. You did a 3-day fast and nothing happened. So what's 2 weeks? And I've just been praying, God, where are you? Everyone has questions. And I've just been praying, God to show himself. And through this time, like, God, use me, help me to be an encourager. And then you reached out. And I thought that was amazing, because I'm not one to come up here and publicly speak, because all I do is cry. But you had asked me, and told my husband, I was like, that lady I was telling you about that did Bishop's podcast that goes to Michaela's church, she reached out to me, and he's like, well, you should do it. I was like, well, I'm too scared, but I had been praying, God use me, and he's opening a door. And I'm hoping and praying that this, podcast, somebody who, even if it's just one person that reaches somebody. And that's always been my vision when starting a business, is just to reach people. It's another form of witnessing. And, whether it's in public, in a brick and mortar, or behind a screen, I've always prayed that God would use me in some way, in a business transaction or email, or, just a kind word or a kind note, and, a bag. And we started a business just a few weeks ago that God gave me. And it wasn't on my list on my 52 days, but God blessed me and opened that door of something that I've always wanted to do. And it's called Jubilee Avenue. Jubilee meaning a shout for joy, which the Lord knows I desperately needed it, and was so discouraged during that 52 days, even weeks after, months after. And so that's how starting again, what I meant by that post, and starting again and starting a new business with that.
I love that you brought up that you did the 52-day fast and nothing happened, because I have had people reach out and they've said, I did this 52-day fast and I mean, all hell broke loose.
Yeah.
It's like, the devil is really mad. And I can remember doing many 52-day fasts with my dad's name on them and nothing. It would be worse. It's almost like, don't even fast for him.
Yeah.
Don't even pray. And I did one 52-day fast for a family member. It was the hardest 52-day fast I had done for anyone. I gave up coffee for this person, and I said I would never give up coffee for anyone else or anything else again. And I haven't. And it was, to make the right decision. And the decision that I knew was right wasn't made. But I have seen the sovereign hand of God move in those situations and in time. And I can always look back and say, that giving up something for 52 days might not have brought a miracle, but I know that it brought something because the devil wouldn't be mad during that time if nothing was happening. I've done so many 52-day fasts and God just move in insane ways. And then, yeah, there are times that you do those fasts and you want the Lord to move in this direction or you want him to do this, but someone else is attached to it. And I've learned over the years and through doing them, when a lot of times, whenever it's a person attached to the 52-day fast, every time they may not be moved during that time. And it really looks discouraging. It really looks like you said, someone may have passed or a divorce happens or a decision is made that completely offsets that person's life, just something worse happens at the end or during. But I do know that the Lord, he does see the fast and he does see the sacrifice and he honors our sacrifice. And sometimes I know I had a lady that wrote in and she said that she was doing a 52-day fast for a family member. And she said she got, like, it was for her daughter. And she said she got worse. She said, but God gave me greater peace. She's like, so if nothing else during this time was to give me peace, that God is, he's seeing me through. She's still a person and God has to move on their hearts and they have to give up and they have to do the right thing. Or he may have, a situation where it's a healing and we're looking for it in this direction and he didn't answer the way we wanted him to, but he's still in control of those situations. But the peace that he can give us through the sacrifice is sometimes worth the sacrifice.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad that you brought that up because, like I said, I know that there are people. I mean, some of you guys have sent in testimonies, and I know that some of you have testimonies to send. And God has done the absolute miraculous through your 52-day fast. But some of you may be listening to this and you're like, it doesn't feel like that God moved on my behalf. It doesn't feel like that this prayer was answered. But you don't know what you shook up in the spiritual realm whenever you did that fast in the physical realm. Something happened. God moved in some way. And you may not see it now, or it may not be something that you asked for. But like you said, in the form of a business that you got, you weren't asking for it. You weren't praying for it. You didn't see it in the physical realm when you were doing that 52-day fast, but God moved in this, that it moved something in the spiritual that
Right.
turned around and manifested itself in your life. So I love that you shared that and that you brought that up, because if you're listening to this and you have been discouraged and you're like, it doesn't look like this happened, I pray that this encourages you that something did happen. Some way God is moving, but it just may not be in a way that we expected him to. Like I said, I did so many 52-day fasts with my dad's name attached to them. And I would add other things because I knew not to only fast for him to come back to God, because I didn't want to do the fast completely in vain. But now looking back, I think, there's no telling what God, it looked like it was getting worse, and it was getting worse, but it had to get worse to get him to a place where he could get better, to get
Right.
him to a place low enough for God to move. So your situation may be getting worse, but it may be getting to a place where God can step in and intervene and move in that situation. So you talked about that you own this new business, this clothing shop. Tell us a little bit more about that and where they can find you. Where can we find your new shop?
So we're on Instagram and Facebook is Jubilee Avenue Co. or jubileeavco.com. We sell modest clothing. I love being able to represent Jesus well, my pastor, my husband, all of those things that, God commands us to do. I love being able to have that available for other women or women seeking modest apparel. So we're on Instagram and Facebook.
And your stuff is so adorable. Like you were posting all these outfits, and usually I like one or two dresses, and I'm like, uh-oh.
Well, really,
Like,
I'm getting it for me. Like, I'm gonna find something that I'm like, okay, I'm gonna want everything. My husband's like, you cannot, Amy. You have to sell these things. And I'm like, okay,
you just have, you're your brand, right? You're your own
exactly. Like,
billboard.
I'm wearing something right now.
And it's
Like a
all,
walking advertisement. I love marketing. Like, that's just my passion. Like, I've always done that. So it's like, hello.
but I was looking through your stuff. I'm like, I love literally every single thing that you have. I was like, I don't need to follow people that are my exact same style.
I know, right?
So make sure that you guys check her out on there.
And for the listeners or viewers that are on this podcast, I want to offer a 15% off code at the checkout, UY15. So make sure you're listening until the end to get that code.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to make sure and use that. This podcast has been so helpful, if for anything else, to clear my sinuses. I feel like I have cried more on this podcast. I don't know. I can't say more than any other because I've cried on several of them, but I've definitely cried from beginning to end. You sharing your story. And no, I did not have a clue about the 52-day fast and what all had happened during all of that. And so knowing that you had written the email and that you were going to say this and this, and it didn't work out, but it's crazy how I felt you on my heart to ask, and I asked you about doing the podcast. And then I had someone message me and they're like, you need to ask Amy Wyant to be on your podcast. And I'm like, I just asked her. I was like, that was just such a neat confirmation there. And then all the things that you've talked about today, I know have blessed and helped someone that is listening. There's no doubt. But as you know from listening to the Unashamedly You podcast, we always like to end asking our speaker, what is one last thing that you would like to leave to the Unashamedly You community?
I would say just to let go of bitterness, let go of hurt, let Jesus be the source of your joy. And even if your testimony is not as big, you can say, as mine or traumatic, your testimony is still so important to somebody who could be struggling or going through that one little thing. And that one little thing may seem so minute to you, but it's huge to somebody who needs to be unified with you, your testimony. And your testimony is telling about Jesus. So my bio in my thing is to tell my story, is to tell of him. Everything from the hurt and what I've learned along the way, and how being hurt from something so traumatic as a child, can help me in business hurt, learning how to cope with different things. So your testimony is important and you are important.
Love that. Thank you so much for coming on here, for being so open with all of us on this podcast today. I know that it was not easy to talk about all the things that you did, but I can tell you that it was definitely helpful to hear your testimony. And I know that you have blessed and helped someone today. So thank you so much for being on. You guys go use that promo code UY15 at checkout and make sure and tag us whenever you do so that we can see all your beautiful things that you guys are wearing and representing. Thank you so much for being on here today.
Thank you.
We are so grateful that you chose to listen to another episode on the Unashamedly You podcast. I would be delighted if you would go and leave us a review over on Apple or Spotify and let us know how this podcast has helped or encouraged you. Your reviews and comments honestly mean the world. I pray that you find the encouragement you need week after week with each episode. Go be unashamedly you.